We now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here is Reverend Martin.
It's a video clip. We want to welcome you to the It's Time broadcast. Purpose of It's Time is that I, as a preacher, feel that we need to be talking about the social ills, social injustices, and inequities that have plagued our country and our nation for so long, even since its founding. And I feel that we can no longer just diddy-bop around or circumambulate. We need to talk about these issues directly, as well as addressing solutions for the recovery or the reparations that need to be proffered to those who have been victimized. Injustices and inequities and inequalities that were many times codified by law, federal, state, county, and local. Our marching orders come from James, the brother of Jesus, chapter 5, beginning at verse number 4, which says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of those that reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." Isn't that strange that God is so concerned about the working man receiving a just day's pay for a just day's work? Our backup scripture, one of them among the many, because if you study this 5th chapter of James, you will find a lot of condemnation of the economic system, even of his day, and especially as it continues to metastasize in our day and time. But I want you to note as well in the book of Deuteronomy, if it look like I'm looking away, I'm looking over here to my tablet. I guess I could put it over here, but I wouldn't have to look quite so unprofessional. But in Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning at verse 14, this is what it says. "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant." Notice, God speaking. "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren," that means whether he be somebody you know, "or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates." That means whoever it is that you employ or that you hire, and whatever you agree to pay them, you ought to make sure that you keep your word. And when they get through working that day, you're supposed to put their money in their hands. Look what it says in verse number 15. "At his day, thou shalt give him his hire." That means when he get through working that day and get ready to go home, as it was in those days, you're supposed to do what? Put his pay in his hand. Notice, God said, "Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it." You're not supposed to hold my money. I don't need you to hold my money. You give me my money. See, a lot of time folk will owe you some money, so when I got it, I'm going to get whatever. If you got it, that's the problem. I need my money. Somebody ought to say amen. Finishing out the verse, it says, "For he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." So God wanted us always to have good business practices. Treat each other with equity, fairness, and I believe everything will be all right. But, of course, we all know that that is a very naive way of looking at reality, and one instead has to seek recourse to the law through lawsuits and through petition in order for justice to, as Amos said, or as Isaiah said, roll down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. But toward that end, my brothers and my sisters, is where I am determined in my own mind that this nation should bend itself, bend toward justice, toward righteousness, become a lover of the truth. For the scripture says, not in vain you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Some versions say set you free. Point remains, if you know the truth, then it empowers you to move on forcefully in the right direction. As the old folks used to say, know you're right and then go ahead. And so our broadcast, it's time. It's time to talk about the things, the injustices, not as abstractions, but as they concretely affect and manifest themselves in our culture, in our nation, in our government, in our world. There's a very quaint and innocuous sounding phrase that's been bandied about all over the Beltway. You talk about historic outcome. Hey, what a nice phrase, historic outcome. Most of us, in order to find a nice house that we can afford to rent, have to go all the way to Temecula and Hemet and Moreno Valley, Lancaster, Hesperia, Victorville, all out in those terrible places. Hey, if you live out there, that's good. God bless you. But the point is, why do we have to go way out there in order to find something reasonable that we can have a reasonable assurance that we're not going to get put out as the years go by because we can't pay that high rent? You should have been able to find something here in Los Angeles, nice, and that you could afford, that would not take all of your paycheck and all of your Social Security check and all of your benefits just to pay a month's rent or a month's house note. No, that's inequity. That's inequity. If you know anything about America, you know a lot of this land was land grant. That means it was given to the original settlers here in this country, especially here in California. The government was just giving away 160 acres of land at a pop to everybody. Not, of course, not black people, not slaves, not Negroes, not colored, not ever. But at that time, that land was being given away like that, 160 acres at a pop. And all you had to do was within 5 years have cultivated and built a house or cabin or some permanent residential structure upon that first 5 acres of land and show that you were going to cultivate it, and that land was your land. That's how Daniel Freeman, who was one of the earliest settlers here in Inglewood, came into the possession of the properties over here. He had property all over, not only he, but a lot of others, all of those that came out during that time. Like I said, except if you were Negro or colored or whatever label you wish to put upon yourself. You know, now we're African Americans, but the point is the same. We were denied, but the land was given away. Now that land that was given away for free, you can hardly find a decent place to rent an apartment or to buy a house. What I mean by decent, that you can afford. And notice, if you please, my brothers and my sisters, as a result, whole segments of our society are being forced because they cannot no longer pay the note, they don't have a job no more, or they had a major illness and it took all of their money. They can't afford to stay in a house no more. A lot of people are now living in their cars, them that still have cars, because now the state of California is passing city ordinances here in Los Angeles and in Inglewood and in surrounding municipalities that you can't sleep in your car no more. What's up with that, my brothers and my sisters? In other words, if all you got to stay in and live in is your car, and the police take your car, now they've taken your one possession that you still had. Now you have nowhere to stay, nowhere to go. And I think that is not only a disgrace, it's immoral, and it should be a crime. But what they have decided to do is to criminalize poverty. If you're poor, you're a criminal automatically, according to the way that the city councils of the various municipalities are passing laws. As a matter of fact, right over in Santa Monica, was a 92-year-old pastor, I was trying to think of his name, that was arrested, mind you, arrested, put in jail for feeding the homeless, feeding the hungry, right over there in Santa Monica, not more than 2 weeks ago. And think about that. Just let that marinate in your mind, that the Bible tells us to feed the hungry. The Bible tells us to clothe the naked. The Bible tells us not to turn a blinded eye or a deaf ear to our brothers. And here is a preacher, mind you, that has set up a facility out of his own pocket, out of his own dime, to try to alleviate the suffering, the immediate suffering at least, of those, because when you're homeless, one of your first and major concerns is, where am I going to eat today? You know, right? It's just like when you lose all your money in the casino in Las Vegas. Time you lose your money, your stomach start growling, because it start asking you, you start thinking about how we're going to eat. And all the way back home, you pass in every kind of restaurant, hopefully you can get on in so you can get something to eat. It's just a natural reaction. And whole governments have controlled their populations through famine and through hunger. And do not think that this current homeless situation is by accident, it's by design. Do not think that the hunger and the famine that many people are experiencing in this nation, in this state, in this county, in this city is by accident or is innocent. No. You control people by hunger. You control people by famine. And it's a disgrace. And those of us that still have something to eat, we best be looking out for our brothers and our sisters. Yes, that is involved in reward, in compensation, in paying an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. Truly, if we had the compassion in this nation that we put in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution, we would be a different people. Remember, Langston Hughes said a long time ago, America has never been America to me, and yet I am determined that America will be. And this is what we and you and I especially, and I trust you will join me in this quest toward justice, this quest toward freedom, this move toward equality, that you will join me in this journey, because we cannot leave our brothers and our sisters languishing on the side of the road. It must not be just one Good Samaritan. We must all become Good Samaritans. And as Dr. Martin Luther King said in one of his sermons or speeches, we must come to recognize that the whole Jericho Road system has got to be changed. I ought to get an amen on that somewhere. And so these thoughts preliminarily push us into our next segment, which I want to applaud Brother LeBron James for speaking up about these school shootings, speaking up about the inequities and injustices in our land. Came to our attention that about a week or so ago, by the time you see this broadcast, that he was criticized by no less a personality than, I think, Dr. Laura Ingraham, who has a syndicated show around the world. I don't listen to it, but because she's ultra-conservative, which is another word for saying racist. But she took it upon herself to counsel LeBron to shut up and dribble. Stop talking about social ills, social problems, social justice. He has his own, I believe, broadcast somewhere on the internet called Uninterrupted Media. And whatever it is, probably similar to this one, although far more successful, I'm sure, he was discussing the issues of the day. And she took exception and counseled him to shut up. That's what the word she used, shut up and dribble. But I think the time is out for our athletes and our entertainers who show us all of their beautiful lifestyle and all of their possessions and all of their material. Well, I think it's way past time for them to do just like LeBron did and speak up and speak out on these social justice issues, especially as they relate to black people. Yes, we got to speak out because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And as Police Chief William Bratton said in one of his addresses, that some of the worst experiences of black history in America were made possible by the police. So then we all as a people have to acknowledge the historic inequities that have plagued our land. I have a quotation from the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates. You know, he's wrote several bestsellers lately. I've got one of his books called "We Were 8 Years in Power," and but the one he became famous for was something about notes to my son, and another book that he has written. Got about 3 or 4 good books out there right now. But here's what I wanted to draw your attention to, is that in an interview, he interviewed President Barack Obama. Let me get this close enough. When you get my age, you have to get stuff a little bit closer. You can see it. But in an interview that he did with President Barack Obama while he was in office, this is President Obama talking. President Obama said, "A rudimentary knowledge of American history tells you that the relationship between the federal government, mind you, and the states was very much mixed up with attitudes towards slavery, Jim Crow, and anti-poverty programs, and that means who benefited and who didn't. Who benefited and who didn't." And I'm going to keep on reading before I start making some comments. This is President Barack Obama talking, and so I'm careful not to attribute to any particular resistance or slight or opposition to race, mind you. But what I do believe is that if somebody didn't have a problem with their parents being employed by the federal government, mark you, and didn't have a problem with the Tennessee Valley Authority, it used to be a Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, I think it's finally gone out of existence. The purpose of that was to provide electrification in the rural areas. Only problem with that was that most of those places that got electrified, that received the electrical service first, were exclusively white. Electrifying certain communities and didn't have a problem with the interstate highway system being built, and didn't have a problem with the GI Bill, and didn't have a problem with the Federal Housing Administration subsidizing the suburbanization of America. And that all helped you build wealth and create a middle class. And then suddenly, mind you, as soon as African Americans or Latinos are interested in availing themselves of the same mechanisms as ladders to the middle class, you now have a violent opposition to them. Then I think you at least have to ask yourself the question of how consistent you are and what's different and what's changed. Now, that was the former President Barack Obama being interviewed in the Oval Office, and even he could see the inequities and was aware. Of course, coming from Chicago, you had to be keenly aware of how the residential situation had been skewed and had been slanted exclusively. All of the suburbanization and all of the residential building for the developers in Chicago, Illinois, that occurred back during the 30s and 40s, and all of the Negro people were pushed into projects like Cabrini Green and other such like. You can't help but see that there's been a huge inequity. And in other words, Cicero and all of those types of places were built with public assistance. My public assistance and your public assistance. We paid the taxes, we paid the bills, but we were not allowed to be subsidized. Remember that the Federal Housing Administration subsidized 90% of the cost of those houses. You could buy a house with only 10% down, and because the government was guaranteeing to the builder, to the developer, to the bank, that if you defaulted on that loan, the government was going to pick it up. Now, you can't beat that with a stick. But it was an exclusive contract, exclusive in the sense that it was based on the requirement that you had to be Caucasian or white. And as Brother and Sister Burnett sadly found out, if you ever get a chance to look at that little film that's out there called Race, The Illusion of Power, how disheartened they were. Because see, you can, if the bank tells you, well, so you got to satisfy this demand or that demand, then you have a hope that you can probably, go out and find and make up what you're lacking. But if you tell me that it's based upon my race or my skin color, then you're saying I can never hope to have a house for my family. I can never hope to have a place for my kids to call home that is decent. And that didn't just occur in Chicago. Unfortunately, that, my brothers and sisters, that was the pattern that was followed all across this nation. Here in Los Angeles, we still got Nickerson Gardens and Hawaiian Gardens and Jordan Down, and Pueblo del Rio, and all those kind of places that were built for Negroes to live in. Whereas the white or the Caucasian, they got the beautiful places there, Lakewood, Westchester, Inglewood, Southgate, Glendale, Burbank, Just the list goes on and on. All of those beautiful suburbs where you could drive through on Sunday, see all those people out there cutting the grass and enjoying home. But no black people, because it was an exclusive area, and the exclusion rested in the fact that it was exclusively white only. Matter of fact, again, even though I may be repeating myself, it bears repeating that, and mind you, these were American citizens. We're still American citizens. But you were viewed as an infiltrator, because it said if you let Negroes move into that community, it will drive down property values. And that canard, that myth, that legend served to turn well-meaning white people against black folks, colored people trying to move in, trying to move up. You remember the Jefferson story about moving on up to the east side, finally got a piece of the pie? Well, the white folks resented you getting a piece of their pie in their neighborhood, because the phrase went, there goes the neighborhood. All right, we have almost come to the end of another show. I hope I've said some things that will stir you up. I would that you would hit the subscribe button beneath the YouTube link. Subscribe to KTYM. Subscribe to Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Subscribe to It's Time. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Hey, if you're on Facebook, hit the share button and share it on Facebook. Because we're going to keep on putting out this degree and level of hard truths, because it's way past time for us to understand why things are at the historic outcome levels that they are. They didn't get there by accident. There has been political chicanery all along the line. You put an economic floor up on the one segment of your society, but you put a ghetto floor up on the other segment of your society. You cannot come along after 1968 and say, well, wow, I wonder why things are like they are. Lyndon Baines Johnson said that you can't take a woman that has been shackled for 250 years, bring them up to the starting line of a race, unshackle them and say, now you're equal, and think that you have done what you ought to do. Again, I tell you, my brothers and my sisters, it's time. God bless you. Thank you so much. May God keep you.